Hi, we are in Luke 9 verses 10 to 17. Luke chapter 9 verses 10 to 17. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God, and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so that they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here." He replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd." About 5,000 men were there. But he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each." The disciples did so, and everyone sat down. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. In our last video, we spoke about the power and authority that was given to the disciples to preach the good news and to heal the sick. We emphasized that Christian power and authority means, more than anything, complete dependence on God, because whatever power and authority we might have come from Him. This reality, the fact that our power is not in fact our own, but Christ's, is illustrated quite powerfully in the passage we're exploring together now. The disciples have just returned from their great campaign of preaching and healing, where they experienced and did things they never imagined they would do. They became central players in the proclamation of the coming kingdom of God. And with their words and hands, they brought healing to people suffering from illnesses, and they liberated people from demonic powers. So they returned from this amazing and tiring trip, and they enthusiastically tell their teacher about all they did. And Jesus then takes them to a desolate place. In the Gospel of Mark, the author tells us that the reason Jesus took his disciples to an isolated place was so that they might get some rest. Now let's just pause here and observe an important truth that's really easy to forget, especially these days. Rest is a good thing. Jesus recognizes that his disciples have worked hard and they need some rest. So if you're sitting at home these days, and by these days I mean the past 2 months, and you're working less than you're used to, and you feel guilty or you're just losing your mind because you can't stand not working, remember that God calls us to rest. Remember how important it was for God that his people honor the Sabbath. This was important to God, 1, because he wanted his people to rest, and 2, because he wanted his people to learn that their basic needs are not ultimately achieved through hard work, but they come as a gift from the hand of God. Sometimes we think that if we don't work those extra 2 hours, or if we don't read those extra 2 chapters, or if we don't cook those extra 2 portions, then the world will be lost. We won't have enough money, we won't have enough knowledge, we won't have enough food to feed everyone. But ultimately, God is the one who provides for our every need. So when the time comes to rest, let's genuinely rest and know that that's okay. The reality that it's God who provides for us helps us rest better. But it also helps us for those times when something unexpected comes our way and we end up having to work a whole lot harder than we had anticipated. This is what happens in the story that we just read. Jesus takes his disciples to an isolated place so that they can get some rest. But a great big crowd of people hear that Jesus and his disciples are going to, so-and-so place, and they immediately begin to follow them. Have you ever been in a situation where you just got home from work or from school, and you're walking towards the couch and you're ready to just melt into the couch, but right before you get a chance to sit down, someone asks you to do a chore? It's the worst. It's the worst. This is probably how Jesus' disciples felt as soon as they saw the crowd following them. Right when you're about to relax with your closest friends, you see a crowd of people approaching you who you know just won't mix with your friend group. There are some scenes in the Bible that it's so easy for me to picture, and this is one of those scenes. Now, what does Jesus say as soon as they see the crowd following them? Quick, hide! No. In verse 11 it says he welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Full of kindness, Jesus welcomes them into the group and responds to their needs. The day's starting to come to a close, and maybe the disciples are thinking, okay, we deviated a bit from our scheduled rest, but at least people heard about the gospel, their needs were covered, everything that needed to be taken care of has been taken care of, so okay, let's send them back now because they're probably hungry, they're going to need somewhere to stay, and obviously we can't help them with that. We've all been in situations where we're talking to someone we'd rather not be talking to, or we're doing a job or a task that we'd rather not be doing, and as soon as we find an excuse to get out of there, we grab a hold of it. Sorry, I have to go home, I have to go walk the dog. Similarly, the disciples, exhausted from their campaign and from this unexpected encounter with the crowd, they think of a good reason for everyone to go home, or at least to go somewhere else. Verse 12, late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here." And Jesus said to them, "You give them something to eat." You've just gotten home from work, you're going towards the couch, and someone asks you to do a chore. You do the chore. It takes a while, but you do it. You finish the chore, you start moving towards the couch again, and right as you're about to sit down, the same person asks you not to wash the dishes, not to vacuum the floor, not to do some everyday, regular household chore. No, they ask you to paint the whole house. And you're staring at this person for a while, and you're thinking to yourself, seriously? And then you say, "But we don't have any paint." And on the inside you're thinking, "Now leave me alone." Jesus is asking his disciples to do something impossible. And he asks them, he tells them really, to do it as if it's the most normal thing in the world. Jesus sees no good reason for the crowd to have to leave. They're here with us, so let's show them hospitality. This is his thinking. Remember in the previous passage when Jesus gave instructions to his disciples for their campaign, he said, "Take nothing with you, no bread, no money, and stay in the home of the first person who's willing to offer hospitality." Well, what was Jesus essentially asking of his disciples then? He was asking them to trust that God would provide for their every need. He wasn't asking them to take advantage of their hosts and just go from one house to the other, garbling up all the food they have. He wasn't asking them to be freeloaders. He was asking them to trust God by welcoming the hospitality of others. Now, similarly, but also conversely, he's asking his disciples to trust God by showing hospitality to the crowd. Disciples of Jesus, you and me, will need to be people who both welcome the hospitality shown to us by others and who ourselves extend hospitality. In any case, we'll need to be people who recognize that both the things we receive as well as the things we offer are gifts from God. And of course, there will be times where we'll feel like we don't have anything to offer. We're exhausted during those times. We feel that we don't have anything good to give ourselves. Now, this is essentially what Jesus' disciples are saying to him. We don't have enough to eat for ourselves. How do you expect us to feed 5,000 men? We can relate to the disciples. What are we supposed to give? They're probably thinking. We just spent the longest time giving. We just got back from a trip where we were helping people left and right. We were preaching to them and healing them and exorcising demons. That's right, Jesus could have said. You did do all those things. You did preach the coming of the kingdom of God. You did heal people. You did do exorcisms. Did you ever expect to do any of those things? Did you ever expect to be able to tell a demon to come out of a person? Did you ever expect to be able to take away someone's sickness? Well, now that I'm asking you to do one more thing that seems impossible, why do you doubt it? And ultimately, who is it that does all those things? You or me? Okay, so have the people sit down, because surely this is something you can do, and I'll do the rest. Verses 16 to 17, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. This is no small task either. So we're not just, belittling the disciples. It takes a lot of work to get 5,000 people organized and sit down and then to distribute food. Sometimes we work hard for Jesus, but he does the real work and then we mediate. Verse 17, they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. 1 basket for each disciple who doubted that Jesus could give the people what they needed. When Jesus calls us to rest and accept hospitality, he does so to remind us that it's God who provides. And when Jesus calls us to work and extend hospitality, he does so to remind us that it's God who provides. Whether he's calling you to work today or to rest, trust in him. And he'll leave you with far more than you expected, because he's not calling you to something that is reliant on your own strength. He's calling you to something that relies on his strength.